Hello, everybody. This is the first of a series of. Got something playing in the background here. This is the first. Ooh, little technical difficulty. It's the first of a series of videos that we're going to be doing through the Center for Prophetic Imagination between now and right before Christmas. So I'm excited. This first episode, it's a Monday, and so Monday is for mysticism. And so every Monday, I'll share a mystical experience, broadly defined, as a springboard for engaging in conversations around spirituality and resistance. But then also, each Monday, I'll set up the theme for that week. This week, we're talking about subversion because the name of this short run broadcast is Subversive Spirituality. Yeah, and Wednesdays we are going to be sharing just on the theme itself. Wednesday is for words, so we'll actually talk about subversion or subversive on Wednesday, and then every Friday I'm going to share a story from history of someone who embodies some aspect of kind of a liberatory spirituality, because Friday is for friends. I know it's a little bit on the nose to have such cringy alliteration, but that's how I do. So, as I'm about to share a story, kind of my formative mystical experience, I invite everyone who's listening along to leave your comments because I'd like to engage in a conversation. I know this first episode, I'm not likely to get a ton of viewers. Hopefully, it'll build. But um, I want to have a conversation and not just talk one way because it's boring just to listen to one person talk straight at you for about 30 minutes. Also, there's a kind of an ulterior motive here before I actually start in with my story. Um, we are at the Center for Prophetic Imagination trying to raise over $20,000 this fall between now and the end of the year. It's fall fundraising season. And so I'll be sharing where we're at with our goals. Not a lot. This isn't going to be like a telethon where it's mostly fundraising and a little bit of content. It'll be the other way around because the work we do is important. It's about more than me, more than Kaylee. It's about a lot of people and this larger struggle for liberation in a time when there's a lot of shit going on that's not good. Um, and I'll get into the shittiness of it all. But then also, how do we engage that shittiness in a way that's hopeful, in a way that subverts things? So, speaking of subversive, I want to start with the first story of my subversion. And the reason I'm using the word subversive, people kind of cringe like it when I use that word, as though it's a negative word because it's turning upside down. Subvert means to basically to turn over. And I find it a better spiritual metaphor than repentance or conversion, which are loaded with all sorts of theological baggage. And because we think of them as spiritual terms, we don't apply them politically. Subversion is a political term that I would like to apply spiritually. Um, in the scriptures, whenever you see the Holy Spirit named, something is about to be subverted. Something is about to be flipped over and changed radically in some way, or at least challenged. So we can think about it that way. To me, mystical experiences, and I'm not going to define mysticism yet in this episode, but any encounter we have with some sort of sacred presence will leave us changed somehow, usually in ways that we're not expecting. And even if it's a positive experience that soothes our soul, it can still be subversive. So the first time I was aware of being profoundly disrupted by some sort of spiritual presence happened when I was 14 years old at a fundamentalist Bible camp. It's where I met my spouse that week. And I used to say that that's where I met Jesus, but I think claiming this experience as an encounter with Jesus is a guess. So, 14 years old, I went to Camp Joy Bible Camp in rural Minnesota, and I wasn't really particularly religious. I was there for the girls, because it's what you do, or at least what I do is try to go to camp to meet girls, and I unfortunately, even though I did meet a girl that I ended up later marrying, um, I was awkward as fuck. Such an awkward kid. And as a lot of kids are awkward, but I was also smart. I just sat and cynically judged everyone. That's kind of in my awkwardness and disconnection from it all, and the pain of feeling that alienation. I just sat around being all judgy all week. So at the end of the week, um, pretty much every day at a fundamentalist Bible camp, there's an altar call and a chapel service. But then there's the one last big effort to make sure you're good and saved. And this usually happened at the end of the week bonfire. It's when everyone would gather around the fire. Someone with a guitar would sing songs like Kumbaya or It Only Takes a Spark to Get a Fire Going. All those songs. And part of the tradition of Camp Joy at the time, and probably still is to this day, is when they're doing the bonfire, there's opportunities between some of the songs to give testimonies. That's when a camper will stand up and grab a piece of wood from this box next to the fire, say something about how um, God has been good to them or something, and then throw the piece of wood into the fire, some sort of like offering. Now, unfortunately, teenage kids are angsty and not always able to, localize within themselves what has been good, where they've encountered the Lord. So what ended up happening is a lot of campers started sharing shit stories about horrible things, right? Grandparents and loved ones dying, breakups, pets dying, just the crushing weight of teenage ennui bearing upon their soul. Those sorts of stories. And as a cynical as fuck 14-year-old boy, I thought at the time, I just sat there thinking, well, this is a bunch of crap. Now, in proper mopey Minnesotan fashion, um, I was focusing on my own issues. And I just didn't think these people's struggles were nearly as bad as mine. And there's a little bit of truth to that, but not a lot. So as I'm sitting there cynically judging everyone on the edge of the bonfire area, I suddenly felt enveloped in darkness. Now, it didn't feel like evil darkness. It just felt like a sense of absence, as though everything around me was turned all the way, dimmed all the way down. And I felt just like it was so distant. But it wasn't a sense of entirely a sense of absence. I felt a presence. And that presence communicated to me the words, I didn't hear it audibly, but I felt the words, you are the brokenness of the world, or you are the suffering of the world. It wasn't in literal words like that. You're the brokenness of the world. In that moment, I felt as much as I guess a 14-year-old kid can feel sitting at a bonfire in rural Minnesota. I felt connected to the world's suffering. And so I broke down and sobbed. I just started weeping. I had no idea what the hell was going on. Now, if you see a 14-year-old kid at a fundamentalist Bible camp crying while people are giving testimonies, it's a pretty logical conclusion to assume that they've been convicted of their sin and are ready to repent and accept Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior, which is what my camp counselor did. And since I had no idea what was going on, I went along with it. I figured this person knows better than I do what the hell is happening. So I got led through the sinner's prayer. It didn't seem to really connect with my experience, but whatever. From there, I continued to sob as I made my way to my cabin and crawled up onto the top bunk and fell asleep crying. And the next morning, I woke up and I could tell something had shifted, but I wasn't exactly sure what. Now, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that in some way, the entirety of my adult spiritual life has been unpacking that moment. And I look back to sometimes I'll think, how the hell did I end up being like this when other people I know ended up being like that? When I ask myself questions, how do you go from being a rural Minnesotan wearing a red, white, and blue rodeo shirt and a cowboy hat in your senior high picture to eventually being an anarchist trans woman who talks about mystical experiences? And the only way I can really start to answer that question is to point, at least at the very beginning, to that experience. Um, with that story, again, you got to have some sort of questions, people. So feel free to leave your comments or questions wherever you're watching this, just in the field below. It should pop up on my screen, and I'll try to respond to them as I see them. But with that, after I shared that story, my coworker Kaylee is in the waiting room, so I'm gonna bring her in here. Just a second. Boom. Hey.
Hey.
Okay, so I got to change my volume settings because it's playing through my desktop audio instead of the ears. So here we go. We're getting the bugs worked out, everybody. It's fine. Okay, that should work now. So maybe you have some. Have I ever told you the story before? Have
We
you ever?
actually haven't talked about any of like your mystical experience things, which is funny because like this entire this entire
I mean, it's what
organization
our organization is
exists.
partly about. You'd think I would have brought him up
Yeah,
at some point.
I mean whatever. Yeah. And I mean hearing about your camp stories, like I very much relate to relate to that because um that's where like a lot of my stuff came from was like these high school camps. Even though like at the end of the day I was going there basically because of the girls and um would have like these very like emotionally manipulative experiences like at the end of camp. I never had like the spiritual experience like you, but um yeah, like I
Did
can almost put I can point to like that time as like why I went to Bible college and then seminary and yeah.
you? So yeah, and the emotional manipulation thing is fascinating too, because really, just to unpack this a little bit, um, when you're in the middle of that, so I grew up in kind of more of a charismatic sort of setting, but this Bible camp was very not charismatic. But both of those things tend to have in common this idea that you really want to lay on the guilt, right?
Hmm.
You want to tell
Yeah.
a kid that you played with your thingy, and so you're going to hell now. But Jesus died.
Oh, that was a
Jesus
good one.
was nailed to a cross to take care of that for you somehow. Like, but in order to accept that, you have to feel really emotionally overwrought about it, so that you can then give your the throne of your heart over to the Lord. All right. So a lot of people would say, well, that's usually when people talk about mystical experiences, they're talking about that kind of that
Hmm.
emotionally overwrought bullshit. And so,
Yeah.
right. But did you ever have those sorts of camp experiences where you were made to feel like horrible shit and you were like getting sobby and accepted Jesus kind of a
I
thing? Did
mean,
you have that?
yeah, that was basically that's basically what camp was. Um, yeah, and they would totally lay it like they know like okay. I understand that at camp they have this like idea of what they're trying to do. They actually do think that like sexuality is sinful and stuff.
Hmm. Well,
But
and
at
all
the
kinds
same
of other
time, this
things are
is a
sinful, but
yeah,
that's
yeah,
the big one that you have to watch
that's the
out
big
for
one.
when you're a
And
teenager.
and that's really like the thing is like they would lay on this on teenagers with like these raging hormones and be like, you're a natural teenager, so you're sinful. And of course, like that was striking with me. Like
Hmm.
I struggle with lust so much and have an entire week full of that is yeah.
Hmm.
It but like at the same time, like I honestly probably had a little bit like less of like a sex drive than most teenagers, probably because I was trans egg, and so like I felt really weird in my body.
Trans
Um,
egg, everyone, for who people who don't know what that term is, because I didn't even know it until like being trans for like 6 months. So the metaphor is that you don't know you're trans. You're like a little baby chickie in an egg, and you until you the egg cracks and you emerge like holy shit.
mhm,
So the term that we would maybe those friends of mine that think that they're a cis person, but I have suspicions that they're actually trans, we would call them an egg. That's what that
mhm,
means. Sorry
yeah,
to
basically.
interrupt.
No, I mean that's fine. Um, but yeah, like it was very much like you put these teenagers like I mean to them they see it as just two genders existing. So they separate the guys and the girls and like but you spend most of the time with them, but then at like the end of uh like at night you go off to your separate cabins. But there's like an entire camp full of people that you're attracted to because you're a teenager and then hear that you're sinful because you're attracted to all of
It's the
these other
perfect
people.
like racket. Like let's
Yeah,
surround you
like
by people that you're gonna think are hot, and then you're gonna be around that all week, and then we're gonna say, "See, you're going to hell
yeah, basically.
unless you buy what we're selling." Now, um, so it's interesting to me, if I think back at that. So I had that experience with this camp counselor trying to lead me to Jesus because of what he saw me going through. And
Hmm.
so in my early evangelical years, I tried to shoehorn that experience into the classic conversion experience
Hmm.
story, but it wasn't. But I was certainly converted to something. I
Hmm.
think back on that all the time, like the, and it's okay for people listening along to think that my story is a little bit um, too incredible to really take that seriously. I get it. Like the idea of a 14-year-old having a mystical encounter with the divine presence of God in such a way that they experience the sum totality of suffering in the world is a little bit, you know,
It's
sounds
a little
like
bit
it's
out
full of
there.
shit. It's a little bit out there,
Yeah.
but it's what I experienced. And it transformed me somehow. It subverted me. It took me from one path to another, and made me question everything. Like there's always since that moment any irritation. I had irritating doubts about things that I was participating in that caused suffering. So
Hmm.
this is the thing. I I cannot imagine my life um, being committed to challenging oppression
Hmm.
without that moment starting it off. I
Yeah.
feel like since
And
that moment, I've always noticed, like when I've been in a room where people are left out and marginalized, I felt an irritation about it, and it was comes
mhm.
from that moment. So I was fucked over pretty good
I
for
mean,
being able to
yeah.
enjoy my privileges.
I mean, for me, it was like my big camp um conversion or whatever it was, deciding to go to Bible college and become go into ministry in some way.
Hmm.
Um, which I actually ended up doing, which is really like this weird um it's like this really weird intersection of yeah, that was definitely a lot of emotional manipulation, but then it also like put me on to something that like I actually do enjoy. Like I enjoy theology. I
Hmm.
enjoy um talking about spirituality and like helping people with their spirituality. I don't see it the same way as I did back in the day, and uh, the theology I was given, I basically reject. But it still led me to like where I'm at, which is a really like to me that creates kind of like this weird um like oxymoron in my head where I'm like, I think that experience was kind of fake, but also at the same time it was apparently real enough to get me like where I'm at right now.
Hmm.
So I don't know. Maybe that's one of those God works in mysterious ways crap lines, but might actually be true.
Yeah, and even if we're going to be just psychological about it, the idea of
Mhm.
when if we experience something that we feel is meaningful,
Mhm.
even if the experience itself is fraudulent, it's touching with some sort of deep longing. Otherwise, we wouldn't ascribe
Yeah.
meaning to it. So somehow in there, even if there's a bunch of shit involved with it, it was still touching with this deeper thing that that long, and it still exists today.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So just before we kind of get into this final run here, and hopefully again, leave your comments, people. Like, I know most people didn't get a heads up that this broadcast was going to be happening, but if you're watching, you have any kinds of comments or questions, please share them. But
And
don't be
we'll
too
be
rude
doing
about
this
it.
3 times a week. We'll
Yeah.
be doing this
So
3 times a week. So this is a practice for all the people
yeah,
watching and listening. Like,
this first one is like that first paragraph you write when you're writing a book, and you have to go back and delete it. Like any good
yeah.
paper, you always go back and delete the first paragraph, generally speaking. So this is kind of the first paragraph. But part of the reason we're doing this is to kind of draw attention to the fact that we, as a nonprofit, do a bunch of things, and in order to pay for living and doing those things, we need to raise money. It's what nonprofits do. And so this fall, we're trying to raise over $20,000. And, I'm going to put this little banner thing back up. Um, you know, some of the things, like, I think most people, though, just to start with where people are at, most people experience CPI almost entirely through our online presence. And it just so
Mhm.
happens that you're a director of digital outreach. Um, do you have any broad observations about your experience engaging mostly on Facebook? I think most people who are watching this are probably going to be watching on Facebook, but this is also
Yeah.
broadcasting on YouTube and I think Instagram, if I got it, or will, if I got it set up right. We'll find out
Oh,
afterwards.
we'll find that later.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, so yeah, I wasn't expecting Facebook to be our major platform. Um, I think what I'm really realizing like how much what we do is is both meaningful to a lot of people, and also causes a lot of um, what's the word I'm looking for? Like uh, a lot of objection to like some of the things that we're saying because we do like the two of us like we hold a very similar theology. It's not
Mhm.
exactly the same, but it's very similar.
We overlap
Um,
enough to be able to work
yeah,
together without getting crabby about it
yeah, and
so
like
far.
our big thing is like liberation of the oppressed, and
Mhm.
we look at the Bible and read the Bible with that lens, and it turns out when you think that the Bible might be about liberation and stuff, you tend to find it. Um, but then that really like pushes a lot of people that are still in this like, no, the gospel is about forgiveness of sins, and we're here saying no, the gospel is about like helping people and like
Mhm.
helping the marginalized and giving voice to those that have been silenced. And when you switch that focus, like people push back because um sin and like this idea of the afterlife really allows people to not focus on the present, and
Mhm.
that is challenging to them. It's not just challenging it's not just challenging their theology, it's challenging their actions. But on the same time, we have a lot of people that are like really they're seeing like that need in the world. And, like the more that we're connected, especially through digital means, the more that we're seeing the fact that the marginalized have been silenced. And finally the marginalized are starting to get voices to be able to say, hey, this is what's going on, this is what these actions are doing. And there is this need of people like wanting to understand faith through a lens that actually cares about the world here and now and just not like this let's get to the afterlife type
Mhm.
theology. um
Yep.
and so what I'm seeing at least in the digital space is like what we're doing is really important because there's so much need for people to find space where they can experience spirituality in a way that actually resonates with how they understand the world.
Mhm. And it's, it kind of ties into like the way in which a lot of people engage in spirituality in general. And this is, there's a book about this. There's lots of books of people talking about this, but spiritual bypassing. It's this idea that we're going to use spirituality to walk around the problems of the world. And to me, this
Hmm.
idea of an afterlife um, as kind of the focus of spirituality is kind of definitely encourages kind of pervasive spiritual bypassing, that like I don't have to pay attention to the shitty things that are happening around me, because this this will help stir within me a longing for Jesus, and I'll turn from my wicked ways and go to heaven when I die. And so when you bring in attention, if that's your whole framework, and someone else is like talking about trans stuff, or they're talking about Black Lives Matter, they're talking about um, what all the whole, different kinds of things, it seems like a distraction from the real spiritual stuff.
Hmm.
And I've had conversations and arguments with people who are within kind of contemplative spaces, who
Hmm.
generally don't want to include me in as kind of one of those people, because I seem so negative to them. So I usually, if I'm getting invited to podcasts to talk about stuff, it's as an activist, even on spiritual podcasts, they don't want to talk to me about spirituality so much. It's the activism thing, because they assume that the sort of focus on struggle and suffering is somehow a detraction from uh, real spirituality. And there's even this idea that proper spirituality always begins with awe or joy. But my experience started with suffering. And some people will want to discount that. But part of the thing about suffering, and why I started with that story, is because uh, this, to me, it's important, this important insight of liberation theology, that if we're going to say God is anywhere, we should at least begin by saying God is present with those who suffer, not in a way that makes suffering sacred, but in a way that underscores that people are sacred, and that anywhere the sacredness of humanity is being trounced upon, um, there we can say God is there and God is present in it. And so that's kind of why I feel like I've been preloaded for being a liberation theology person, because of that experience. We have our
Hmm.
first comment. Um, it's not really even a comment. It's like an emoji, and it's like from Michelle. It's the sideways tilted laugh cry face. I'm not sure when these comments come up. I can never figure out exactly at what point of the broadcast they're responding to. So,
Yeah, it's from my experience with Facebook Live, it could be from any like almost any like time. So I don't know if it's a laugh at our theology or a laugh of jokes we made earlier.
I think
So
Michelle wouldn't be making fun of us, but making fun with us. That's my guess with Michelle,
that
because Michelle's commented on previous broadcasts we've done in the past. We're just have a couple minutes left before we're going to end the broadcast, and thanks for everyone who's been tuning in. Oh, yep, there we go. Michelle writes, I can't remember what made me laugh, but you being a negative person was funny. Laughing with you. I actually don't experience I mean, I felt pretty negative lots of times in my life because of anxiety and depression. But it's one of the funny things is, after coming out, I don't feel negative hardly ever. I feel usually pretty happy and joyful, even when I'm dealing with a lot of horrible things. But I'm actually accused of being more negative now, because somehow, if you're trans, you're just against stuff.
well,
Which there's
so
a
I mean
history of
that's
that
kind of
being
the
put on marginalized people in general,
yeah
that they're negative.
that's one of those like I tweeted this one time. It's like
No, not
uh
negative.
it,
You're much happier now. Thanks, Michelle.
it's like the church has centuries worth of discriminating against LGBTQ plus people through death and torture and imprisonment. The church has a history of being discriminated by LGBTQ plus people by asking them to stop. And
Yeah,
so, yeah, there's like this mentality that if you're like, hey, that's not cool, then you're a negative person because you're calling
yeah,
things out.
yep. Saying no to oppression makes you negative.
Hmm.
um, which even gets people even fall into that thinking themselves if they're saying no to stuff, because it's what we hear all the time. And then it's worth reminding ourselves that if you're saying no to something bad, it's because you're protecting something good. So
Hmm.
um, thriving and being alive and being with people you care about um, is good. To lose
Yeah.
sight of that because you get crabby about it when someone wants to oppress you is to lose sight of what's really going on. And Michelle says, "Amen." Thanks for being our commenter, Michelle. Like it really helps to have someone we know someone's out there listening and commenting.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean,
but
we have listeners.
yeah, yeah.
We should give like a top fan like badge to Michelle.
I, does that come with anything besides a little thing next to?
I don't know.
Um, Well, thanks for tuning in. Those who tuned in for the live broadcast, or this is also something that'll just be existing on our social media platforms that people can watch later, and we'll reshare this so that people can see it. And we'll be back on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday between now, which is Halloween, um, and the Friday before Christmas. So we'll see y'all then. Oh, Michelle says, "I've missed your voice and face." Thanks, Michelle. Liv says, "Yes, you do." I don't know what I do. I
Maybe
don't
you
know what
seem
the,
happier now.
yeah, maybe. Maybe that's what it is. Again, everything's slightly out of sync enough to
Yeah,
not know.
it's always. Yeah.
It's always a guess. It's what makes us wonderful and keeps us on our toes. So we'll see you on Wednesday, everybody. And Wednesday, we're going to talk more specifically about the idea of subversion. So it'll be fun.
So.